Emma Williams stepped off the old bus with nothing but a small bag and her grandmother's worn recipe book clutched tightly in her hands. The dusty town of Meadowbrook stretched before her like every other place she had tried to call. However, the past few years, the afternoon sun beat down on the cracked pavement, and tumbleweeds rolled lazily across the empty main street. Her mother had left when Emma was just 12 years old, running away with a traveling salesman and leaving behind only broken promises, unpaid bills, and a daughter who carried the weight of shame wherever she went. Emma had spent the last 8 years moving from town to town, trying to escape the whispers and pointing fingers that seemed to follow her everywhere. Emma pulled her thin jacket tighter round her shoulders and started walking down the main street, looking for any sign that might offer work. The few people she passed on the sidewalk stopped their conversations to stare at her. Their eyes were cold and knowing. In small towns like this, stories about fallen women and abandoned children never died. They were passed down like family heirlooms, growing larger and more dramatic with each telling. The old diner had a "No Help Wanted" sign in the window. The general store owner shook his head before Emma even finished asking about work. By the time she reached the end of Main Street, her hope was wearing thin, but she refused to let it die completely. At the edge of town stood a large ranch that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the horizon. White fences lined the property, and cattle grazed peacefully in the distance. Emma could see a tall man with graying hair working on a broken fence post. His sleeves were rolled up, and sweat gleamed on his weathered face as he hammered new boards into place. This was Thomas Cooper, though Emma did not know his name yet. He owned the biggest cattle ranch in 3 counties, a spread that had been in his family for generations. Thomas had been alone for 5 years since his beloved wife Margaret passed away from a sudden illness. Since then, he had retreated into himself, cooking simple meals of eggs and bacon for breakfast and heating up cans of soup for dinner. His ranch workers, David and Michael, survived on beans from cans and burnt coffee that tasted like motor oil. Emma took a deep breath and walked across the dusty earth toward Thomas. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her head held high. She had learned long ago that showing fear or weakness only made people treat you worse. "Yes, sir," Emma called out as she approached the fence. "I need work." Thomas looked up from his hammering, surprised to see a young woman standing in his yard. She was small and thin, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and clothes that had seen better days. But there was something in her brown eyes that caught his attention. It was not desperation, though he could see she was in need. It was determination, burning bright and fierce. "I can cook better than anyone in this town," Emma continued, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. "I ain't my mother, but I can cook just as well as she could." Thomas set down his hammer and studied this unexpected visitor. Something about her reminded him of better days, when the ranch house had been filled with the smell of fresh bread and the sound of laughter. Margaret had been an excellent cook, and the kitchen had been the heart of their home. Now it sat mostly empty, gathering dust and memories. The ranch hands had been complaining lately about the terrible food David had mentioned just last week, but he was thinking about finding work somewhere else, somewhere with decent meals. Thomas knew he should hire a proper cook, but he had been putting off the decision for months. The idea of having someone else in Margaret's kitchen felt like another small betrayal of her memory. But looking at this young woman with fire in her eyes, Thomas felt something stir in his chest that he had not felt in a long time. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was just time for a change. "You got 1 week," Thomas said quietly, his voice rough from years of giving orders to cattle and ranch hands. "Show me what you can do. room and board in the old bunkhouse, but no pay until you prove yourself. Emma felt hope bloom in her chest for the first time in years. It started as a small, warm feeling and spread through her entire body like sunshine. After a long, cold winter, this was her chance to prove she was different from her mother. This was her chance to show that she could keep her promises and work hard and be someone worth trusting. "Thank you, sir," Emma said, and her voice was thick with emotion she tried to hide. "You won't regret this." Thomas nodded once and picked up his hammer again. As Emma walked toward the small building he had pointed out as the bunkhouse, he found himself wondering what Margaret would have thought of this arrangement. Somehow, he had the feeling she would have approved. Emma set her small bag on the narrow bed and opened her grandmother's recipe book. The pages were yellow with age and stained with years of use. Tonight, she would start cooking. Tonight, she would begin to build the life she had always dreamed of having. Emma moved into the small room above the ranch kitchen, carrying her few belongings up the narrow wooden stairs. The room was simple but clean, with a single bed, a small dresser, and a window that looked out over the pastures. It was more comfortable than many places she had stayed over the years, and for the first time in months, Emma felt like she might have found a real home. The other workers, David and Michael, were not sure about her. They had worked on the ranch for several years and had grown comfortable with their quiet routines. David was a tall, lean man in his 30s who had been riding horses since he was a boy. Michael was younger, barely 25, with calloused hands and a shy smile. Both men had heard the stories about Emma's mother running away and leaving debts behind at every town she had lived in. "She'll probably leave just like her mother did," David whispered to Michael as they watched Emma carry her grandmother's old pots and pans into the kitchen. "Women like that, they don't stick round when things get hard." Michael nodded, though he felt a little sorry for the young woman. She looked so determined, so hopeful. But he had learned not to get attached to people who might disappear without warning. Emma heard their whispered conversations, but she did not let their words hurt her. She had heard worse things said about her and her family over the years. Instead of getting angry or feeling sorry for herself, she rolled up her sleeves and started cooking. She opened her grandmother's recipe book and began planning meals that would show these men what real cooking could do. The first morning, Emma woke up before dawn and started making breakfast. She used her grandmother's recipe for buttermilk pancakes, mixing the batter by hand until it was smooth and perfect. The smell of bacon sizzling in the pan filled the kitchen, and soon the rich aroma of fresh coffee joined it. When David and Michael came in for breakfast, their eyes widened with surprise. "This is the best breakfast I've had in years," Michael said, taking another bite of the fluffy pancakes. David said nothing, but Emma noticed he ate every bit of food on his plate and even asked for seconds. Over the next few days, Emma used her grandmother's old recipes to make warm, hearty meals that filled the ranch house with wonderful smells. Her beef stew was thick and rich, with tender chunks of meat and vegetables that melted in your mouth. Her fresh bread was golden brown and still warm from the oven, with a crust that cracked perfectly when you broke it open. The kitchen became a place of comfort and warmth instead of the cold, empty room it had been for so long. Thomas watched from the doorway as his workers smiled for the first time in months. David and Michael, who usually ate their meals quickly and in silence, now lingered at the table, talking and laughing as they enjoyed Emma's cooking. The ranch felt alive again, filled with the sounds of conversation and contentment that had been missing for too long. Emma took pride in every meal she prepared. She made hearty soups on cold days and fresh salads when the weather was warm. She baked pies with fruit from the old apple trees behind the house and made cookies that reminded the men of treats their mothers used to make. Each dish was prepared with care and attention, seasoned perfectly and served with quiet dignity. One evening, Emma decided to make biscuits to go with the chicken dinner she had prepared. But as she worked in the kitchen, her mind wandered too. Memories of her lonely childhood. She thought about all the nights she had eaten cold cereal for a dinner because her mother was too busy or too sad to cook. She remembered the empty refrigerator and the growling in her stomach that had been her constant companion for so many years, lost in these painful memories. Emma did not notice that the oven was too hot. When she opened the door to check on the biscuits, they were burned black on the bottom and smoking. The acrid smell filled the kitchen, and Emma's heart sank as she pulled the ruined pan from the oven. Thomas chose that moment to walk into the kitchen to thank Emma for another excellent meal. When he saw the black biscuits and the disappointed look on Emma's face, his expression became stern. For a moment, Emma thought he might tell her to pack her bags and leave. "I'm sorry, Mr. Cooper," Emma said, tears filling her eyes as she looked at the burned biscuits. "I'll do better tomorrow. I promise I will." Thomas saw how hard she was trying, how much this job meant to her. He remembered his own mistakes when he first learned to run the ranch after his father died. He had burnt more than his share of meals and made countless errors before he learned to do things right. "Everyone makes mistakes, Emma," Thomas said gently, his stern expression softening. "What matters is that you keep trying. These biscuits don't change the fact that you've given us the best meals we've had in years." That night, Emma sat by her window looking out at the stars and promised herself she would not give up. She had found something worth fighting for here at the ranch. For the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged somewhere, like she was building something that could last. Tomorrow she would make perfect biscuits, and the day after that she would cook another wonderful meal. She would prove that she was nothing like her mother, that she could be trusted to stay and work hard and care for the people who had given her a chance. As weeks passed on the ranch, Emma learned that Thomas carried deep sadness in his heart like a heavy stone that never left his chest. His wife Margaret had been the joy of the ranch, filling every room with her laughter and making even the hardest days feel light and happy. She had been the one who planned birthday parties for the ranch workers, who brought soup to neighbors when they were sick, and who made the big ranch house feel like a real home instead of just a place to sleep and eat. When Margaret died suddenly, from a fever that the doctors could not cure, Thomas felt like half of his soul had been torn away. He closed his heart to everyone round him, building walls so high that no one could climb over them. He was afraid to care about anyone again, because losing them hurt too much. The pain of Margaret's death had been so terrible that he decided it was better to feel nothing at all than to risk feeling that kind of loss again, late at night. When the ranch was quiet and the workers had gone to their rooms, Emma and Thomas would sit in the warm kitchen drinking coffee from thick ceramic mugs. These conversations started by accident when Emma stayed up late preparing bread dough for the next morning and Thomas came down because he could not sleep. Soon it became a habit that both of them looked forward to. Though neither would admit it out loud during these quiet hours, Emma would tell Thomas about growing up without a mother, always wondering if she was not good enough or if there was something wrong with her that made her mother leave. She talked about the nights she had waited by the window, hoping to see her mother walking up the path to take her home. She shared how she had spent years trying to be perfect, thinking that if she was just good enough, maybe her mother would come back. Thomas would share memories of Margaret and how empty the ranch felt without her laughter echoing through the holes. He told Emma about the way Margaret used to hum while she cooked, how she would leave little notes in his lunch pail, and how she could make friends with anyone she met. He talked about the silence that had filled the house after she died, his silence so deep it felt like drowning, I spent my whole life trying to prove I'm not like my mother, Emma said one night, stirring sugar into her coffee and watching the steam rise from the cup. But maybe I was so busy running from her mistakes that I forgot to make my own choices. Maybe I was so afraid of being like her that I never learned who I really wanted to be. Thomas nodded slowly, understanding exactly what she meant. I've been so afraid of losing someone again that I forgot how good it feels to care about people, he admitted. I thought if I kept everyone at a distance, I would never have to feel that kind of pain again. But all I did was make myself lonely. Their friendship grew stronger with each passing day. Emma noticed that Thomas smiled more often now, and sometimes she even heard him whizzing while he worked. Thomas saw that Emma was becoming more confident, standing taller and speaking up during their conversations. The walls round both of their hearts were slowly crumbling, one brick at a time, when a big storm came rolling across the plains, bringing with it fierce winds and heavy rain that lasted for 3 days. Emma and Thomas were trapped in the house together while David and Michael stayed in the bunkhouse. The power went out on the first night, but Emma cooked wonderful meals on the old wood stove while Thomas built warm fires in the fireplace and told stories about the early days of the ranch. During those 3 days, they helped each other with small daily tasks that brought them closer together. Emma mended Thomas's old work shirts, carefully sewing the torn seams and replacing missing buttons while they talked by the firelight. Thomas fixed a broken suitcase, replacing the bent hinges and broken clasps so it would close properly again. These simple acts of kindness felt more intimate than grand gestures because they showed real care and attention. Emma cooked hearty stews and fresh biscuits that filled the house with warmth and comfort. She made hot chocolate with marshmallows and told Thomas funny stories about her grandmother's cooking disasters. Thomas shared tales about Margaret's attempts at gardening and how she once tried to grow roses in the middle of winter. For the first time since Margaret's death, laughter filled the ranch house again. On the 3rd night of the storm, as they sat by the fire listening to the rain on the roof, Emma realized that she felt completely safe and at peace. She was not waiting for the other shoe to drop or wondering when she would have to pack up and leave. This felt like home in a way that nowhere else ever had. Thomas looked across the room at Emma, who was reading one of Margaret's old books by the firelight, and felt something warm stir in his chest. For the first time in years, the ranch felt like a home instead of just a place to work. He was caring for someone again, and instead of fear, he felt grateful. Emma began to believe she could belong somewhere, that she could build a life that would last. Thomas began to remember what it felt like to have someone to care for, someone whose happiness mattered as much as his own. The storm outside was fierce and wild, but inside the ranch house, two lonely hearts were finally learning to trust again. Just when Emma felt happy and safe for the first time in her life, everything changed in a single moment. She was hanging laundry on the line behind the ranch house, humming one of the songs Thomas had taught her, when she heard the sound of an expensive car pulling into the dusty yard. The engine was quiet and smooth, nothing like the old trucks and farm vehicles that usually visited the ranch. Emma's heart stopped when she saw who stepped out of the shiny black car. Patricia Williams looked exactly like Emma remembered, but somehow different too. Her mother wore fine clothes that probably cost more than most people in Meadowbrook made in a month. Diamond earrings sparkled in the sunlight, and her hair was perfectly styled in a way that spoke of expensive salons and careful attention. "Emma, darling," Patricia said with a bright smile that did not quite reach her eyes, "look at you, all grown up and beautiful. I've come to take you home. I've married a wonderful man named Charles in the city. He owns several restaurants, and when I told him about my talented daughter. He was so excited to meet you." Emma felt her hands shaking as she dropped the wet shirt she had been hanging. After all these years of wondering and waiting, her mother was finally here. But instead of joy, Emma felt a cold fear spreading through her chest. Patricia continued talking, her voice bright and cheerful, as if she had not abandoned her daughter 8 years ago. "You could go to cooking school in the city, Emma, learn from real chefs in fancy restaurants, have a real life, not this simple ranch life in the middle of nowhere. Charles has already spoken to the best culinary school in the state. You could start next month." Word spread through Meadowbrook faster than wildfire. By evening, everyone in town knew that Patricia Williams had returned, looking rich and successful. The whole town was talking, and most of the conversations were not kind. People remembered the debts she had left behind, the promises she had broken, and the young daughter she had abandoned. Some of the ranch workers began to wonder if Emma would leave just like her mother had done years ago. David and Michael whispered to each other during dinner, glancing at Emma with worried expressions. They had grown to love her cooking and her quiet kindness, but they remembered too well how her mother had disappeared without warning. Thomas felt his old fears return with crushing force. What if Emma decided she wanted more than what he could offer? What if the simple life at the ranch was not enough for a young woman with dreams and talent? He had been abandoned before, when Margaret died, and the thought of losing Emma made him feel sick with worry. Emma felt confused and scared, torn between the past she had always imagined and the present she had learned to love. Part of her had always dreamed of her mother coming back, of having a real family again. She had spent countless nights wondering what her life would have been like if Patricia had never left. But now, looking at Patricia's false smile and listening to her talk about opportunities and better lives, Emma realized her mother had not changed at all. Patricia still thought only of herself, still made promises that sounded too good to be true. She had not asked Emma if she was happy or if she had friends or if she liked her life at the ranch. She simply assumed that Emma would drop everything and follow her to the city. "I need time to think," Emma told her mother, her voice barely above a whisper. Patricia's smile faltered for just a moment. "Of course, darling. But don't take too long. Charles is expecting us back by the end of the week, that weekend." The town held its yearly barbecue in the park. Emma volunteered to cook for the whole event, preparing dozens of dishes that fed the entire community. She made her famous beef stew, fresh cornbread, apple pies, and cookies that disappeared as soon as she set them on the tables. As Emma worked, she watched the people round her with no eyes. She saw Thomas helping elderly neighbors carry their chairs and making sure everyone had enough to eat. She watched David and Michael playing games with the local children, laughing and joking like the good men they were. She noticed how the ranch workers had become like family to each other, supporting one another through hard times and celebrating together during good ones. Emma realized that this simple life was not small at all. It was full of real love and honest work, of people who cared about each other without expecting anything in return. She had found something here that money could not buy and fancy schools could not teach. She had found a place where she belonged, where her work mattered, and where people valued her for who she was, not what she could do for them. When Patricia found Emma cleaning up after the barbecue and asked again for her answer, Emma stood, tall and proud. She looked her mother straight in the eyes and spoke with a strength she had never felt before. "I ain't my mother," Emma said firmly, her voice carrying across the quiet evening air. "And I'm staying where I belong." Patricia's face changed, showing anger and disappointment that she quickly tried to hide. "You're making a mistake, Emma. You'll regret this choice when you're stuck in this nowhere town for the rest of your life." But Emma just smiled and shook her head. She had finally learned the difference between running away and choosing to stay. She had found her home, and no amount of money or fancy promises could make her leave it behind. Patricia left town angry, her expensive car kicking up dust as she drove away from Meadowbrook without looking back. She had expected Emma to follow her like a lost puppy. Grateful for the chance to escape her simple life, instead, she found a daughter who had grown strong and independent, who knew the difference between real love and empty promises. Emma felt free for the first time in her life as she watched the black car disappear down the road. The weight that had been pressing on her shoulders for 8 long years finally lifted. She had chosen her own path instead of running from her past or following someone else's dreams. For the first time, she was living her life according to her own choices. Not trying to prove she was different from her mother or desperately seeking approval from people who did not really care about. Her dad Thomas watched Emma stand up to her mother and saw the strong, brave woman she had become. During those tense moments when Patricia had tried to convince Emma to leave, Thomas had felt his old fears creeping back like shadows in the night. But as he watched Emma speak with quiet dignity and firm resolve, he realized that his fear of losing her was much smaller than his love for her. She was not going anywhere. She had chosen to stay, and that choice meant everything to him. That evening, as they sat on the front porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Thomas found the courage to say what had been in his heart for weeks. "Emma," Thomas said quietly, his withered hands gripping the arms of his rocking chair, "I've been thinking. This ranch needs more than just a cook. It needs a partner. Someone to help make important decisions. Someone to build a future with." Emma turned to look at him, her heart beating faster as she understood what he was really saying. The gentleman who had given her a chance when no one else would, who had shared his coffee and his stories and his slowly healing heart, was asking her to be part of his life forever. Emma smiled and reached over to take his hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of years of honest work and the warmth that spoke of genuine care. "I'd like that very much, Thomas," she said softly. They began making plans together, sitting at the kitchen table with pencils and paper, sketching out ideas and dreams that had seemed impossible just months before. Emma wanted to start a small restaurant at the ranch where travelers could stop for home-cooked meals and local families could gather for special occasions. She imagined long tables filled with people enjoying her cooking, children laughing while their parents relaxed over coffee and dessert. Thomas helped her design a bigger kitchen and dining room. Using his knowledge of construction and her understanding of what a working kitchen needed, they planned where to put the extra ovens, how to arrange the seating for maximum comfort, and where to build the herb garden that would supply fresh ingredients for Emma's cooking. David and Michael were excited about the plans, offering to help with the construction work in their spare time. Word spread through Meadowbrook about the upcoming restaurant, and people began stopping by to offer their support. The local carpenter gave them a good price on lumber, and the woman who ran the general store promised to help spread the word to travelers passing through town. 6 months later, their dreams had become reality. People came from towns far away to eat Emma's cooking, drawn by word-of-mouth recommendations and the reputation she had built for serving the best meals in 3 counties. The ranch became a place where lonely people found friendship and families made happy memories round tables filled with delicious food and warm conversation. Emma kept her grandmother's recipe book in a place of honor on the kitchen shelf. But now she was writing her own recipes too. She experimented with new combinations of flavors, created special dishes for holidays and celebrations, and developed signature meals that people requested again and again. Each recipe she wrote down was a small piece of the life she was building, proof that she was creating something lasting and meaningful. The restaurant became more than just a place to eat. It was a gathering spot for the community, where farmers met to discuss crops and weather, where families celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, and where travelers found a warm welcome and a good meal. Emma loved watching the faces of her customers as they tasted her food, seeing their expressions change from hunger to satisfaction to genuine happiness. She had learned that she was not defined by her mother's choices, but by her own actions and the love she chose to give others. Every meal she cooked, every smile she shared, every kind word she spoke was a choice to build something good instead of tearing something down. She had broken the cycle of abandonment and selfishness that her mother had started, replacing it with commitment and generosity. Daughters Emma and Thomas sat on their porch each evening, watching the cattle graze peacefully in the pastures and listening to the sounds of laughter from their restaurant. Emma knew she had found something her mother never understood. Home was not a place you run to or from when life gets difficult. Home was not something that just happened to you or something you stumbled across by accident. Home was what you build with your own hands and heart, brick by brick and day by day. It was the love you choose to give and receive, the promises you keep, and the roots you plant deep enough to last through any storm. Emma had finally come home, not to a place, but to herself. The end.